So Air Transat says it's avoided a strike with its pilots after reaching a tentative deal. While the threat of a strike loomed over the head of the airline, they did preemptively cancel several flights for Canadian travelers that caused a lot of headaches. This episode provides us an opportunity to look at the current state of Canadian air passenger rights. And when we want to do something like that, we go to Gabor Lukacs, who is a Canadian air passenger rights advocate. Gabor, welcome back to the program.
Good morning. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, it is. It really is great to be with you. Now, listen, I want to roll back in history just a bit, right? And I'll mention the late, great Mark Garneau, who was transport minister at the time. May he rest in peace. And I think it was in 2019 where Canada passed, with him as transport minister, a Canadian air passenger rights update. So with that in mind, and what we've seen over the years through various transport ministers, I guess now is as good a time as ever to discuss, well, what is the state of Canadian air passenger rights in this country?
The state has been dismal and remains dismal. What Mark Garneau passed in 2019 was under his leadership was an excuse for a passenger protection, a placeholder. It was something written by the airlines for the airlines. It was not protecting passengers meaningfully. And what we have today still does not protect passengers meaningfully. Two of the main areas is what the APPR says and lack of enforcement, both of which are sorely lacking compared to our peers, our fellow passengers in the European Union, who benefit of gold standard passenger protection rules.
So is it fair to say that this latest Air Transat episode is a good example of, where we haven't seen the progress you'd like to see on passenger rights?
This Air Transat episode, and even more so the Air Canada strike in the summer, underscore, they bring to the forefront the many shortcomings of Canada's air passenger protection regime.
So why don't you tell me what would be different if these strikes had happened, or these possible strikes had happened in Europe? How would an air traveler be better protected?
The most important difference is that in Europe, whether it is before a strike or during a strike, you are entitled to meals, accommodation, and lump sum compensation for your inconvenience. In Canada, the air passenger protection regulations incorrectly, unreasonably classifies a strike of the airline's own employees as something outside a carrier's control, like a snowstorm.
Gotcha. And of course, you can make the argument that an airline is very much in control of that fate, right? When it comes to labor negotiations, they're in the boardroom. They're the ones negotiating.
Exactly, it's their employees, their problem, their decisions, and there's no other sector that I can imagine where the vendor, where a company could shield itself from the consequences of its own labor management strategies and not compensate consumers, contracting parties on whose orders or obligations it is defaulting.
Is there any appetite, Gabor, from the current government in Ottawa to give this legislation some teeth, give some more tools to fight for passenger rights?
I'm concerned that the current government does not have any interest in passenger rights whatsoever. Neither did the previous one. You have to bear in mind that in 2023, Parliament passed amendments to the Canada Transportation Act that could have breathed some new life into the APPR. But so far, nothing else but consultations have happened. There was a consultation last year. It ended in March 2025. About how to revise the APPR. There was a second consultation. The first consultation happened in August 2023, and still, even the results of the consultation have not been properly published. There's been another consultation about cost recovery fee, which is the cost that airlines would have to pay to the public purse for dealing with the massive number of complaints that airlines themselves generate. That consultation results have not been published either. So we have a government that is essentially sabotaging Parliament's decision to revamp the APPR.
With Gabor Lukacs, a Canadian air passenger rights advocate. Here's a curious question I have, Gabor, because when we look at Europe, okay, highly regulated, more regulations than you can ever imagine on this side of the world in North America, right, when it comes to air travel. Yet they have cheap flights. I'm thinking about the low-cost carriers like Ryanair and EasyJet, and the list goes on and on. So you have this mix. Usually high regulation means higher prices. Europe, you can make the argument you got high regulation and lower prices. Why do you think that is?
That's a very good question that has been raised on a number of occasions. There are two reasons, and I would say it's a mix of things. One reason is that when you have a clear set of rules, it can actually stimulate competition. Because when you have an uncertainty, when you don't know what the obligations are clear, you don't know whether the obligations will be enforced against you as a new entrant the same way as would be enforced against Canada, which is well connected, that creates some concerns for investors. So legal certainty, clarity of the rules, and stringent enforcement toward each player without any favorites can actually help to create a level playing field, and it can be attractive to invest, and especially to innovation. If someone says, okay, I know what the rules I have to meet, I know what my competitors have to meet, and these are the same rules I have to meet, and I have a better way of meeting the same obligations. That's how innovation works. I would like to say, although in defense of Canadian Airlines as well, that there is also an aspect of different geographics, different population density, different structure of the market. That also, of course, contributes to lower prices, but it's not the only reason. In Canada, I would add that lack of adequate competition is an endemic problem. If you just think of the recent report published by the Competition Bureau this past summer about how concentrated, how oligopolic Canadian air travel or air transportation market is, that's a damning evidence that we could do much better if there was political will. The problem is, I don't see any meaningful political will for a change. We don't seem to be having a visible Minister of Transport who is actually engaged with these issues.
Gabor, listen, to put a bow on this segment here, let's get back to Air Transat, and I'd just love to know your thoughts to wrap up here on how, all things considered, knowing the current Canadian market and how Canadian airlines deal with these things, how did Air Transat overall deal with this threat of a strike?
Air Transat was deceiving consumers about their rights, no question about it. It was giving people a false impression that they actually have to fly back early to Canada. It was not telling passengers that they are entitled to alternate transportation, including on competitors, if their flights were canceled. So the question is not how they dealt with it. The question is, how come the government has not fined Air Transat, nor has the government fined Air Canada for disobeying the laws as written? This type of Wild West situation is incredibly harmful for Canadians and Canadian economy.
And it just goes back to the teeth. What good is the regulation if it has no teeth and no enforcement? Gabor, we got to leave it there. I want to thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me.
Gabor Lukacs right there, Canadian air passenger rights advocate.
I'm Dylan Playfair.
And I'm Tyler Smith.
We're putting loneliness in the penalty box by talking to some of our favorite athletes about the importance of friendship.
This is Bromance.
Bromance is brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, proudly Canadian-owned and operated. Charm has been part of your love stories and bromances for over 50 years. And you can find Bromance on the iHeartRadio network or wherever you get your podcasts.